Hey there, you're looking kind of cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out all my other socials. Enjoy. The alarm blared, piercing through the quiet morning. A hand shot out from under the covers, fumbling to silence the incessant noise. Christian groaned, rubbing the sleep from his eyes as he sat up in bed. The calendar on his wall caught his attention. September 2nd, 2004. First day back at school. His stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Christian had always found the start of a new school year challenging, but this time felt different. Over the summer, he'd been working with Mrs. Lindsay, a teacher who specialized in supporting students with special needs. She had helped him develop strategies to manage his autism in the classroom. Christian swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet hitting the cool hardwood floor. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath as he tried to center himself. That's when he felt it, a familiar presence in his mind, like a whisper just out of earshot. "Josephine?" he murmured, the name slipping out before he could stop it. There was no response, but Christian could have sworn he heard the faintest hint of music playing in the back of his mind. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. These strange occurrences had been happening more frequently lately, but he couldn't quite make sense of them. Christian stood up, stretching as he made his way to the bathroom. He caught sight of himself in the mirror, messy brown hair, sleep-creased face, and blue eyes that seemed a shade lighter than he remembered. For a moment, he thought he saw something else in his reflection, a softer version of himself, but he blinked, and it was gone. "Christian, breakfast is ready," his mother's voice called from downstairs. "Coming, Mom," he replied, quickly brushing his teeth and running a comb through his hair. As he dressed in the clothes he'd laid out the night before, a simple blue t-shirt and jeans, Christian couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The shirt seemed to hang differently on his frame, and the jeans felt looser around his hips. He chalked it up to nerves and headed downstairs. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of pancakes and coffee. His mother stood at the stove, flipping the last pancake onto a stack. She turned, smiling warmly at Christian. "Good morning, sweetheart. Ready for your big day?" Christian nodded, sliding into his seat at the table. "As ready as I'll ever be, I guess." His father looked up from his newspaper, offering an encouraging smile. "You've got this, son. Mrs. Lindsay's been a great help, hasn't she?" "Yeah, she has," Christian agreed, pouring syrup over his pancakes. As he ate, he felt a strange sensation, as if someone else was guiding his movements. His hand reached for the orange juice instead of his usual milk, and he found himself cutting his pancakes into precise, equal squares. "That's new," his mother commented, noticing the change. "I thought you always preferred your pancakes in strips." Christian stared at his plate, confusion washing over him. I don't know why I did that." A soft laugh echoed in his mind, and he nearly dropped his fork. It was Josephine again. He was sure of it. But who was she? Why was she in his head? The rest of breakfast passed in a blur, and before he knew it, Christian was standing at the bus stop, backpack slung over his shoulder. As he waited, he felt a sudden urge to hum a tune he'd never heard before. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, and he found himself swaying slightly to the rhythm. "Nice song," a voice beside him said, startling Christian out of his reverie. He turned to see Emma, a girl from his class, smiling at him. "Oh, thanks," he mumbled, feeling heat rise to his cheeks. Emma tilted her head, studying him. "You look different, Christian. Did you do something with your hair?" Christian's hand instinctively went to his hair. It did feel softer, somehow. "No, I don't think so," he replied, uncertainty coloring his voice. The bus arrived, saving him from further conversation. As he climbed aboard, Christian felt a strange tingling sensation throughout his body. He gripped the seat in front of him, steadying himself as a wave of dizziness washed over him. "You okay?" Emma asked, concern evident in her voice. Christian nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He slid into an empty seat, closing his eyes and leaning his head against the cool window. The tingling subsided, but left behind a lingering warmth that spread from his core to his extremities. "It's beginning," a soft voice whispered in his mind. "Josephine, what's beginning?" Christian thought back, but there was no response. The school day passed in a haze of new teachers, syllabi, and the usual first-day chaos. Christian found himself more attuned to his surroundings than usual, picking up on subtle social cues he'd often missed before. In math class, he surprised himself by raising his hand to answer a question, something he rarely did. "Excellent, Christian," his teacher praised. "That's a very insightful observation." As the words left the teacher's mouth, Christian felt a surge of pride that didn't quite feel like his own. It was as if someone else was experiencing the emotion through him. At lunch, he sat with his usual group of friends, but found himself drawn into conversations he would normally have avoided. He laughed at jokes, offered his own opinions, and even made eye contact more easily than before. "Dude, what's gotten into you?" his friend Michael asked, punching him lightly on the arm. "You're, different today." Christian shrugged, unable to explain the changes he was experiencing. "Just feeling good, I guess," he replied, but the words felt hollow in his mouth. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Christian felt a mix of relief and apprehension. He'd made it through the day, but the strange occurrences and the persistent presence of Josephine left him feeling unsettled. He boarded the bus home, finding a seat near the back. As the bus lurched into motion, Christian closed his eyes, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Suddenly, a vivid image flashed in his mind. A girl with long, wavy brown hair and familiar blue eyes staring back at him from a mirror. The image vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Christian breathless. "Who are you?" he whispered. But whether he was addressing Josephine or the girl in the vision, he wasn't sure. The days that followed blurred together, each one bringing subtle changes that Christian could barely comprehend. His dreams became more vivid, filled with images of the girl he'd seen in his vision. In these dreams, he wasn't just observing her, he was her. One night, Christian found himself in a dream where he was celebrating his birthday, but it wasn't quite right. His friends and family surrounded him, singing happy birthday, but they weren't singing to Christian, they were singing to Melissa. He looked down at himself in the dream, seeing a body that was both familiar and foreign. Soft curves where there had once been angles, long hair cascading over his shoulders. He caught his reflection in a nearby window, and the face that looked back was the one from his vision, the girl with the wavy brown hair and blue eyes. "Make a wish, Melissa," his mother's voice called out. And Melissa, leaned forward to blow out the candles on the cake. Christian woke with a start, his heart racing. The dream had felt so real, so right. He stumbled out of bed and into the bathroom, flicking on the light and staring at his reflection in the mirror. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw a flash of Melissa looking back at him. "What's happening to me?" he whispered, gripping the edge of the sink. "You're becoming who you were always meant to be," Josephine's voice replied, gentle and soothing, in his mind. Over the next few weeks, the changes became more pronounced. Christian's voice began to soften, losing its deeper tones. His hair seemed to grow faster than usual, and he found himself reluctant to cut it. His clothes fit differently. At school, people started to notice. Emma cornered him one day after class, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Christian, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you okay? You seem different lately." Christian hesitated, unsure how to respond. I'm not sure," he admitted. "I've been going through some changes, I guess." Emma nodded, her expression softening. "Well, if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here." As the weeks turned into months, Christian found himself identifying more and more with Melissa. She began to experiment with different clothing styles, gravitating towards softer fabrics and more feminine cuts. Makeup tutorials became a secret fascination, practiced late at night when the rest of the house was asleep. Josephine's presence became a constant, guiding Melissa through the transition. It was during one of their internal conversations that Melissa had a revelation. "Josephine," she thought, "you've been with me all along, haven't you? You're not someone else. You're me, the real me." A warm feeling of affirmation washed over her. "Yes," Josephine's voice replied, but now it sounded exactly like Melissa's own. I'm the part of you that's always known who you truly are." With this understanding, Melissa felt a sense of peace she'd never experienced before. The puzzle pieces of her life seemed to fall into place, explaining the discomfort and disconnect she'd always felt as Christian. Coming out to her parents was one of the hardest things Melissa had ever done. She sat them down one evening, her hands shaking as she tried to find the right words. "Mom, Dad," she began, her voice trembling. "I need to tell you something important. I'm transgender. I'm a girl. My name is Melissa." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Melissa held her breath, watching as emotions played across her parents' faces, shock, confusion, and then, slowly, understanding. Her mother was the first to speak. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, reaching out to take Melissa's hand. "Thank you for telling us. We love you, no matter what." Her father nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We may not understand everything right now, but we're here for you, Melissa. We'll figure this out together." The relief Melissa felt was overwhelming. She collapsed into her parents' arms, sobbing as years of pent-up emotions poured out of her. The journey that followed wasn't easy. There were appointments with therapists and doctors, discussions about hormone therapy and legal name changes. Some friends drifted away, unable to understand or accept Melissa's transition, but others, like Emma, stood by her side, offering unwavering support. Mrs. Lindsay, who had been such a help with Christian's autism, proved to be an invaluable ally in navigating the school system, as Melissa. She worked tirelessly to ensure Melissa's rights were protected and that she had access to the resources she needed. As Melissa's outer appearance began to align more closely with her inner self, she found a confidence she'd never known before. The anxiety and discomfort that had plagued her for so long began to fade. She still had challenges related to her autism, but somehow they seemed more manageable now that she was living authentically. One year after that first day of school, when everything began to change, Melissa stood in front of her mirror, hardly recognizing the person she'd once been. Her long brown hair framed a face that was undeniably feminine, her blue eyes bright with happiness. She wore a flowing sundress, reveling in the way it swished around her legs. "Ready for your first day of school as your true self?" her mother called from downstairs. Melissa took a deep breath, smoothing down her dress. "Ready?" she called back, her voice clear and confident. As she descended the stairs, she caught sight of a framed photo on the wall, a picture of Christian from the previous year. She paused, studying the image of the person she used to be. "Thank you," she whispered to the photo. "Thank you for being strong enough to let me become who I am." With one last look in the hallway mirror, Melissa stepped out into the bright September morning, ready to embrace her future as her authentic self. The presence she had once called Josephine was now an integral part of her, guiding her thoughts and actions not as a separate entity, but as the truest expression of who she had always been. As she walked to the bus stop, Melissa felt a lightness in her step that she'd never experienced before. The world seemed brighter, more vivid, as if she was seeing it clearly for the first time. She hummed softly to herself, the same haunting melody that had played in her mind all those months ago. Emma was waiting at the bus stop, her face lighting up as she saw Melissa approach. "You look amazing," she exclaimed, pulling Melissa into a tight hug. "Thanks," Melissa replied, a blush coloring her cheeks. "I feel amazing." As they boarded the bus together, Melissa couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in a year. The scared, confused person she had been seemed like a distant memory. In its place stood a young woman who was finally at peace with herself. The school day passed in a whirlwind of new introductions and explanations. Some students stared and whispered, but many were supportive, congratulating Melissa on her bravery. Her teachers, prepared in advance by Mrs. Lindsay, used her correct name and pronouns without hesitation. In her final class of the day, English, the teacher announced a creative writing assignment. "I want you to write about a transformation," she explained. It can be literal or metaphorical, real or imagined. Melissa smiled to herself, her pen already moving across the paper. She had quite a story to tell. As the final bell rang, Melissa gathered her things, feeling a sense of accomplishment. She had made it through her first day as her true self, and the world hadn't ended. If anything, it felt like it was just beginning. Walking home from the bus stop, Melissa tilted her face up to the warm September sun. She closed her eyes, savoring the moment. The voice that had once been Josephine, now indistinguishable from her own thoughts, whispered in her mind. "You did it," it said. "You became who you were always meant to be." Melissa opened her eyes, a smile playing on her lips. "No," she thought back. "We did it. Together." As she reached her front door, Melissa paused, her hand on the knob. She thought about the journey she had undertaken, the challenges she had faced, and the person she had become. It hadn't been easy, and she knew there would be more obstacles to overcome in the future, but for the first time in her life, she felt truly, completely herself. With a deep breath, Melissa opened the door, stepping into her home and into the next chapter of her life. The girl in the mirror was no longer a mystery or a dream. She was real. She was here, and she was ready to face whatever came next. As Melissa settled into her new life, she found that her autism, once a source of such struggle, began to feel more manageable. The strategies Mrs. Lindsay had taught her seemed to work better now that she wasn't expending so much energy hiding her true self. She still had moments of sensory overload or difficulty with social cues, but they no longer felt like insurmountable obstacles. Her relationships with her family deepened as they navigated this new reality together. Her parents, true to their word, educated themselves about transgender issues and became fierce advocates for their daughter. Family game nights, once a source of tension due to Christian's difficulty with social interaction, became a highlight of the week as Melissa found herself more able to engage and enjoy the company of her loved ones. At school, Melissa's grades improved as she found herself better able to focus and participate in class. The confidence she had gained through her transition spilled over into her academic life, and she began to excel in subjects that had once been challenging. One day, as she was leaving Mrs. Lindsay's office after their weekly check-in, the teacher called out to her, "Melissa, wait a moment." Melissa turned, curious. "Yes, Mrs. Lindsay?" The teacher smiled warmly. "I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. The progress you've made, not just in terms of your transition, but in managing your autism and excelling in your studies, it's truly remarkable." Melissa felt a warmth spread through her chest at the praise. "Thank you," she said softly. "I couldn't have done it without your help." Mrs. Lindsay shook her head. "I may have given you some tools, Melissa, but you're the one who put in the hard work. You should be very proud of yourself." As Melissa left the office, she realized that pride was indeed what she felt. Pride in her journey, in her strength, and in the person she had become. The months flew by, and before Melissa knew it, it was September again. As she prepared for her second year of high school, she couldn't help but marvel at how different things were from just a year ago. Her room, once a neutral space that had never felt quite right, was now a reflection of her true self. Posters of her favorite bands and movies covered the walls, interspersed with photos of her and her friends. A vanity table stood in one corner, covered with the makeup she was still learning to master. Her closet was filled with clothes that made her feel comfortable and confident. On her bedside table stood a framed photo, a picture from her first day of school as Melissa. In it, she stood between her parents, all three of them beaming at the camera. It was a far cry from the awkward, uncomfortable school photos of years past. As she got ready for school, Melissa found herself humming that same melody that had played in her mind so long ago. But now, instead of a mysterious tune, it felt like a familiar friend, a reminder of how far she had come. She bounded down the stairs, greeting her parents with a bright smile. "Morning, Mom. Morning, Dad." Her mother looked up from her coffee, returning the smile. "Good morning, sweetheart. Ready for your first day?" Melissa nodded enthusiastically, more than ready. Her father folded his newspaper, regarding her with pride. You've come so far, Melissa. We're so proud of you. Melissa felt a lump form in her throat at her father's words. She crossed the kitchen, enveloping both her parents in a tight hug. I love you both so much, she murmured. As she pulled away, she caught sight of her reflection in the kitchen window. The girl who looked back at her was happy, confident, and whole. Melissa smiled at her reflection, no longer seeing a stranger or a dream, but simply herself. With a final wave to her parents, Melissa stepped out into the bright September morning, ready to face whatever challenges the new school year might bring. She was Melissa, she was autistic, she was transgender, and she was finally and completely herself. As she walked to the bus stop, Melissa felt a sense of peace wash over her. The voice that had once been Josephine, now an integral part of her own thoughts, whispered in her mind. This is just the beginning, it said. Melissa smiled, her steps light and purposeful. Yes, she thought back. And I can't wait to see what comes next. The future stretched out before her, full of possibilities. There would be challenges, of course, there always were. But Melissa knew that she had the strength, the support, and the self-knowledge to face them head-on. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.